there, Michael Bovee with DebtBytes. Thanks for tuning into our YouTube channel. Today I'm going to cover 2 reader questions that were submitted. By the way, we have a video up about how you can submit your reader questions. Just go to that video and type in the comments if you want to see something covered on our channel that you haven't found, that we haven't touched on. So a reader writes in to ask, what settlement expectations for judgments can I have? What are my chances of settling at, say, 20%? That's judgment debt. And then another reader wrote in a very similar way to ask how to handle old judgments, judgments that are 5 or more years old. So both questions and my answers to them kind of blend together. First of all, judgment creditors have the force of law behind them. So you got sued, there's a judgment entered against you in court. That judgment allows them to enforce payment through a wage garnishment, unless you live in a small handful of states like Pennsylvania, North Carolina, South Carolina, Texas, Florida. It allows them to levy your bank account to the extent that your state allows them. There are some protections in each state and the lack of protections in others where you have like $0 protected, all the way up to, I believe it's $1,700 of cash in your bank account that is protected from a judgment creditor in New York. And this is, of course, assuming that your money in your bank account isn't protected in some other way, like Social Security, disability funds are protected. We have a video up about that. Check that out. But they also can file a lien against your real property, like your home, right? The place you live. These are things that judgment creditors are afforded, right? These legal enforcement options. So getting them to negotiate for less than 20% or even get to 20% is far from common. In fact, I've been doing this since the early 90s, this kind of work, and I can't think of but maybe 1 or 2 instances where I settled a debt for somebody, and I know what I'm doing, for less than 20%. It was very situational. There was really no indication that there would ever be any other money on the table ever in a fixed income scenario. So when creditors feel like they have the upper hand, right? When an attorney who looks at everybody like a nail, right? In the collection world, an attorney is a hammer. They're the final force, right? They get to exert this extra pressure on people by suing them and levying and liening and garnishing. So to us, they're a hammer, and to them, we're a nail, okay? So when you go to the extent that you've been sued and there's a judgment against you, and now you want to resolve it, and you must, for all intents and purposes, usually, resolve it to get on with your life and prevent all those things, and or be able to get a mortgage or apply for a refinance a loan or something. You're dealing with people that are used to being in a leverage position, right? They're on the hill, you're down below. So how can you get them to accept the least amount? You have to look like somebody who can pay the least amount. And we have other content on our site about dealing with judgment creditors, and certainly on the website, several pages. So I want you to access that information, but understand that my experience dealing with judgment debt or helping people deal with judgment debt is that an optimistic and still realistic target is about half. And that's half the balance that it's ballooned to today, because most judgments have interest. The court sets that, and it's capped at the state level. So a lot of states cap it at, say, 10% of the balance of the judgment. It can grow annually. So you're dealing with an inflated amount. The more you're dealing with an amount, say in the follow-up question where it's 5 years older than 5 years, the judgment, it's going to be ballooned, right? So you're looking at 50% of that balance. 50% isn't always available. Somebody who looks more collectible than somebody else is definitely somebody who's already got a garnishment against them or a lien placed on a property. Debt collectors have access to Zillow, just like you do, plus or minus 10, 15%. They can see the value of your home. They know you're paying a mortgage because they have access to your credit report. So they do the math and they go, hey, this is money good. We'll just sit tight, wait for this person to sell, wait for this person to refinance, and not only are we going to get paid all our money, we'll get more by then, right? So they are in a leverage position, and they think that way. You have the power to disabuse them of that notion, right? Oh, okay, fine. You know, money now is better than money later because, of course, you can file Chapter 7 bankruptcy and wipe out the judgment, right? So they have to think about that too. So when you go to approach them and negotiate these balances down, it does not matter how old it is. From my experience, it does help if the judgment is not fresh, right? They just got the judgment 2 months ago and they haven't even tried to subject it to any of their extraordinary collection measures that they have. Then they might be wanting to wait, until they try and collect from you a little bit better. And if it's 7 years old or 8 years old or 9 years old, you might have a little bit more flexibility, and judgment debts get sold and resold. So you might be dealing with somebody new who didn't even have the cost of purchasing the debt and sold it off, right? So it doesn't really matter how old your judgment debt is as to whether or not you can target a better savings. Something that will matter. Judgments have to be renewed, okay? Now, I do not want you to get overly hopeful that your judgment won't be renewed, but more often than not, in most states, you have to have a renewal of a judgment at a certain time frame, and a lot of states will do that at, say, 10 years. So, or 5 years, 10 years, somewhere in between. There's a couple of them that'll go 20 and you don't need to renew, but again, it's very state specific. We can talk about that in the comments. But for illustration purposes, let's assume that your judgment can be renewed every 10 years and stay collectible for life, all right? What if they forget? They don't. I'm sorry. Again, in all of my years of experience, I've seen maybe a handful and still have some digits on this hand actually left over, just a couple of instances. Nowadays, because of how electronic everything is, they don't even have to send a court runner anymore, right? It doesn't cost them money to go pay somebody. They can actually do it from their office electronically. It's inexpensive, next to free, right? So it's not something they forget. It's just a calendar. It's just an action item for them to do, and I don't see them not do it in over 20 years of working with people to resolve judgment debt. So that covers this. If you have a judgment, if you have a goal and you're trying to resolve your judgment debt, I'm available. Let's talk about your situation. You can pick up the phone. I'm at extension 2. We can talk about it in the comments below. See you on the next video.